Welcome back. Let's talk about the Net Zero Secretary, crazy Ed Miliband, mad Miliband. He wants to cover this entire country with those War of the World windmills that you see everywhere and hideous solar farms. Now, up in East Anglia, to carry all this renewable energy, we're going to need more and more cables, obviously. In Ed's mind, that means more and more pylons. Now, apparently, in order to reach net zero by 2030, which I don't think anybody actually believes we're going to do, we have to put these cables on pylons rather than underground. If we did put them underground, it would save £600 million. It's a lot cheaper, might take slightly longer, so we wouldn't quite make the 2030 deadline. Ed has dug his heels in and said, pylons it is. The question has to be, does this guy actually want to make this country uglier? This beautiful country uglier. What is wrong with him? When we are talking about the madness of Ed Miliband, there is one guy we love to talk to. He's the environment editor at the Daily Skeptic, Chris Morrison. Hello, Chris.
Hi there. How are you?
Very well. Now, in the real world, now, as I understand it, the campaigners who are saying, well, look, Ed already wants to coat too much of East Anglia in solar panels and windmills as well. So can we please just not have hundreds more pylons all over the place? Better still, we can tell you this is cheaper to put these cables underground. Ed has turned around and said, oh, yeah, but then we won't make it by 2030. We won't make it to net zero by 2030. So pylons it is. More expensive pylons it is. In the real world, Chris, does anyone actually believe we're going to get to net zero by 2030?
Well, I was inclined to say Ed Miliband does, but I'm not even convinced that he does. I mean, because I can't see how anybody can believe in deindustrialization that's going to occur, the grid that's going to be put in place. But by the way, late breaking news for the listeners that gas at the moment is providing 56% of our power, and wind is down to 6%. And that's what we're faced. That's what we're faced when we go to 2030.
I'm only laughing because if I didn't, I'd cry. I mean, God. It's ridiculous.
But when they talk about the figures, I mean, I would suck with a very long spoon. I mean, there's this idea that bury them underground is cheaper and then putting pylons up. It might be, it might not. I mean, I get the feeling, when you look at sort of, the estimates of HS2 and this sort of thing, they just invent figures. But the reason he's doing it is he's desperate to go to carpet the place with pylons. The wind is miles away from anywhere. In the old days, we used to put gas stations and power stations in the middle of cities because that's where the power was needed. Now they're stuck out in the North Sea. They're stuck out, by the Shetlands, and so the power has to be taken down. So you've got to concrete the place over, and they'll be sort of fighting for space with the solar panels as well. My main problem with it is, we talked earlier about, and I know you're an animal lover, is it's going to kill a vast amount of wildlife. I was looking into this today. There was a recent survey from the Raptor Protection Society of Slovakia, and they have said that electric cables kill 1.5 million birds in Germany alone. Now, these are big birds. They're storks, they're flamingos, they're eagles, and they get caught up in these damn things. They either hit them, they collide, and they're electrocuted because they've got very large wingspans. And the slaughter is off the scale. In India, the great bustard is under threat of extinction in the Thar Desert because the pylons have killed them all. I was looking again at a quote from a couple of Spanish ecologists talking about how this is a real problem worldwide. When these damn things go up, they're going to slaughter huge numbers of birds, obviously of endangered species. And the amounts that they're planning to do, again, we wrote earlier this year, there was a report from the International Energy Agency in Paris, and they said that in order to go to global net zero, we need to put in 80 million kilometres of new and refurbished cables. That is equivalent to going around the world 200 times. Now, where is all the concrete and the copper and all this stuff going to come from? And we're not going to do it, obviously, but that is the nature of what these mad people are planning. So on a number of counts, they're hideous. They are a real danger to wildlife. If you count up also with the wind farms, the mass slaughter of bats and these sorts of things. They're designed only to bring power that mostly doesn't work, not mostly, but often doesn't work, as we've seen today, in order to bring it to the cities. It's madness, but we know that. I mean, and as you say, does anybody now believe it? I think less and less people are believing it by the day.
Absolutely. Is there, on a general basis, is there any cogency or coherence in any of Ed Miliband's plans? I mean, everything he seems to come out with is sort of insane, illogical, and actually not borne out by the facts. Was it only last week when we last spoke, the carbon capture scheme that he wants to get going for £22 billion? You know, of all people, Greenpeace came in and said, that doesn't work, that's nonsense. And when I heard what carbon capture amounts to, what it actually is, I thought, well, that sounds a bit ridiculous, you know, to take a factory and say, instead of spewing carbon into the atmosphere, we pump it downwards into big caverns underneath the sea. I mean, what could possibly go wrong? It's sort of Heath Robinson stuff that he commits £22 billion of our money to war, £18 billion worth. I mean, do any of his plans add up?
Well, in fact, I wrote an article after we spoke last week about carbon capture, and I think the headline was along the lines of expensive, environmentally damaging, possible threat to life from asphyxiation, earthquakes. Is there no beginning to the advantages of climate capture? Was the headline. Because what they're doing with this stuff is that they're putting it into old oil fields. Now, before we drilled, you had, say, the Permian Basin in the United States, which is the large one across Texas. That's been drilled since the 1920s, and it has got hundreds of thousands of drill holes, wildcatters, everybody. Now, what they usually do is, or what they do, is they fill them with concrete. Now, concrete doesn't last. And so what they're doing is they're pouring billions of tons of pressurized gas. As I said in the article, if carbon capture was fracking for gas, it would have been banned years ago, because it causes earth tremors, nothing like the ones that we saw in Blackpool, which were equivalent to a man falling off a chair. But carbon capture is another crazy idea from these crazy people. The way I look at it with all these windmills and solar panels is it's a bit like it's a green god that we have to worship at the altar of the green god. In any religion that gets powerful fills the landscape with spires and cathedrals and statues. And so in order to worship the holy energy, except on Sundays, of course, when the wind doesn't blow, in order to worship this holy energy, we have to carpet the place with literally, concrete structures, so that wherever you look in this country by 2030, you'll be able to spy a solar farm or a wind turbine or whatever, and it will remind you that this wonderful energy from the breezes is all down to the great Miliband. A saviour walks amongst us, no less, except that he doesn't. He's a lunatic. Yeah,
he is a lunatic, and this is why I believe he wants to stick to pylons, because pylons are visible, and he can say, look at my cables. Look at how they're carrying renewable energy to all the grateful people around the country. There it is. You can see it, rather than the cheaper method of burying them, which would be less unsightly, obviously. He doesn't want that, because that is not a kind of physical tribute to the great Ed Miliband and the vital work he's doing to save the planet by making us very green, even though we produce less than 1% of the world's pollution. The insanity continues apace. There's just nothing sane about anything Ed Miliband does or say, and what worries me about it is that we have a Prime Minister who seems to indulge him. What do you make of that, Chris?
Well, I think the whole Labour Party is indulging him. I mean, but, for goodness sake, we had a Conservative Party. We had Boris. He was even worse.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, it's been a cross-party thing about net zero for a long, long time. The Conservatives are pulling back a little bit, but I think that the whole climate change, you know, we're all going to hell in a handcart, is woven into the whole woke agenda. The whole controlling agenda. I mean, Peter Hitchens talks about how really we've seen the rise of the left wing over the last 30, 40 years. I'm not quite sure I'd put it in such political terms, but you've certainly seen a controlling class, a command and control class. And they use net zero because if you can determine the energy that people have, if you can determine the food they eat, where they can travel, what cars they drive, you've controlled them. You've done what communists were longing to do for 100 years. So there is an element of control on a national and a supranational basis. And I think Starmer is in with this as much.
It up to here. Chris, absolutely right. Great to talk to you as always. Chris Morrison, the brilliant environmental editor at the Daily Skeptic.